Alright, good morning and welcome students. Now today we need to discuss the architecture of the Delhi Sultanate and contemporary regional Indo-Islamic architecture. Now first of all, who were the patrons of this new style of Indo-Islamic architecture? Initially, the Sultans of Delhi, but later some regional sultans. For example, Jaunpur, Malwa, Bengal, Kashmir, Gulbarga, Gujarat, etc. Now, the type of architecture patronized by them has been characterized as Indo-Islamic architecture, indicating that it was the product of the synthesis of the Indian and Islamic styles. ठीक है? The Indian style was the traditional style of India. It was the indigenous style of architecture that had evolved over the previous thousands of years, while the Islamic style was brought to India from Central Asia. However, the very term Islamic style of Central Asia is a misnomer. क्योंकि ऐसा कुछ एग्जिस्ट ही नहीं करता है, राइट? The origin of Islam took place in which part of the world? कहां से इमर्ज हुआ इस्लाम? अरे किस रीजन से? अरेबिया, ठीक है? And therefore Islamic architecture also evolved in Arabia itself. ठीक है. Now, did Arabia also have a rich tradition of architecture like India or Persia or Rome or Greece? वहां पे भी बहुत बड़े बड़े मॉन्यूमेंट्स बनते थे इसके पहले या नहीं बनते थे? नहीं बनते थे. पॉपुलेशन लो था, डेजर्ट एनवायरनमेंट था, राइट. स्टेट्स का ऑर्गेनाइजिंग कैपेसिटी लिमिटेड था, एंड देयरफॉर द ओनली Arabic architectural heritage came in the form of the caravanserai. Now, in Arabia, especially before the advent of Islam, the majority of people were involved in nomadic herding, and some of them were also traders, since Arabia, since antiquity, had been at the crossroads of great civilizations. तो ये लोग ट्रेड में बड़े एक्टिव रहते थे. Long caravans of goods laden with riches from various civilizational centers used to pass through trade routes, crisscrossing the whole of the Arabian Peninsula. And as a result of this, there was a need to construct caravanserais. ऐसी जगह जहाँ पे कैरावान ट्रेडर्स जाकर के रुकें, ट्रेड करें, रात गुजारें, अपनी गुड्स को अकाउंट करें, एंड देन दे कैन मूव फॉरवर्ड. ठीक है. तो ये उस जमाने के होटल्स हुआ करते थे. The basic structure of the caravanserai. It used to be a rectangular building with one entry gateway. अंदर एक ओपन कोर्टयार्ड होता था, और इस वाले रीजन में there used to be small rooms that were constructed. ठीक है. This was what the caravanserai used to look like. यहां पर गार्ड का पोस्ट होता था, एंड इन द फ्रंट जनरली देयर यूज्ड टू बी अ गेट. एंड यही कैरावानसराय द इस्लामिक आर्किटेक्ट्स adopted as the basis for the majority of their construction projects. And the caravanserai also became the basic template for mosques after the advent of Islam. It was only after the Islamic conquest of Persia and Central Asia that Islamic architecture achieved monumental proportions with established principles. Now, इस रीजन में there was a rich heritage, rich legacy of construction, especially the construction of large monuments. And after Islam came to this region, it was only then that the principles of Persian and Central Asian architecture were applied to it and large enduring Islamic monuments were constructed. Now, what were the new things that emerged? So, first of all, the mosque became the most popular concept for monumental architecture. ठीक है, तो सबसे ज्यादा इस्लामिक रूलर्स ने इस रीजन में यही बनाना शुरू किया, मॉस्क्स. इट रिटेन्ड इट्स ओपन लेआउट inspired by the Arabian caravanserai. But apart from that, some Persian elements of architecture were also incorporated, such as the use of arches, domes, minars, niches, vaulted roofs, colored tiles, and various devices for ornamentation. Such as the use of geometrical and natural patterns. Such as the technique of inscribing verses from the Quran on the walls of monuments. Calligraphy, etc. Okay? And it is this Persianized Islamic architecture that arrived in India with the Sultans of Delhi. तो अब ये बताओ that was it Islamic architecture in its pure form, in its original form, or had it already blended with some other culture, some other architecture? Already blend हो चुका था, ठीक है? So a better term to define the Islamic architecture of Persia and Central Asia would be to call it the Perso-Islamic architecture, which blended with Indian architecture to create a unique synthesis which we can call the Indo-Islamic architecture. ठीक है? Now, what are the differences between traditional Indian architecture and Islamic architecture so far as concepts, techniques, devices, material, and ornamentation are concerned. क्या differences हैं? First of all, as far as the concepts are concerned, Indians excelled in the construction of which kinds of buildings? Temples, monasteries, schools, caves, palaces, etc. Whereas Islamic architecture में important concepts क्या थे? Mosque, tomb, forts, gateways, and later मदरसाज. ठीक है. The traditional Indian architecture was based on the trabeate technique, involving the use of devices such as the beam and bracket or pillar and plinth, whereas Islamic architecture excelled in the use of the arcuate technique, involving the utilization of devices such as the arc and the dome. Trabeate architecture resulted in what kind of a sense? A solid building or a delicate building? No, an extremely solid structure, consolidated architecture. So it was known for its solidarity. Did the interior of trabeate structures have a wide open spaces या फिर narrow closed spaces होते थे? नहीं, narrow closed spaces. Why? Because it relied upon the use of pillars, it relied upon the use of beams. तो ऊपर से साइड से हमेशा enclosed spaces होते थे. There was no open view. On the other hand, the use of the arch and dome negated the need for the use of pillars, resulting in buildings that appeared to be delicate, graceful, and open. That is not to say that trabate structures, the ancient temples of India, were not graceful or beautiful. They were beautified through heavy ornamentation. So they were graceful. Solidarity and grace were the two important properties of trabate temple architecture, and they were adopted in some respects by the Indo-Islamic architects. Right. Material used for construction, primarily stone was used, but in some cases bricks and terracotta were also used. In most cases, was any cement like material used? No. तो कोई सीमेंट लाइक मटेरियल या तो ज्यादातर यूज नहीं होता था, एंड इफ समथिंग वाज यूज्ड इट वाज लिमिटेड टू मड मोर्टार. ठीक है. On the other hand, the Indo-Islamic architecture, especially of the early variety, was made out of rubble obtained by destroying the existing temples. तो rubble यूज करते थे. Later, during the Ilbari and Khilji period, primarily red sandstone was used. During the Tughlaq period, yellow and grey sandstone were used, and during the Lodi period, primarily grey sandstone. During the Lodi period, primarily grey sandstone. Tughlaq period में yellow and grey sandstone. Ilbari and Khilji period में red sandstone. और earliest buildings constructed of rubble obtained by destroying existing Hindu structures. In binding material, the Turks introduced the use of lime mortar. Lime mortar introduced किया इन्होंने. ठीक है. Now the ornamentations used by Indian and traditional Islamic architecture were extremely different. ठीक. इंडियन मॉन्यूमेंट्स को ब्यूटिफाई करने के लिए क्या यूज किया जाता था? Sculptures, including human and animal figures. Further, sculptures including geometric patterns and natural motifs. Holy symbols, such as the swastika, the lotus, the well, etc., which had religious significance for people belonging to various cults. और इसके अलावा paintings derived from epics and Purans, based on themes derived from epics and Purans. तो ये सारे डिवाइसेस यूज किए जाते थे. Under Islamic architecture, is the representation of the human or animal form allowed or not allowed? It is prohibited. ठीक है. So we are not going to find any human or animal figures, any paintings, etc. Rather, we are going to find the use of some traditional Indian motifs with some traditional Islamic motifs. Islamic motifs में हम क्या देखेंगे? The use of arabesque, arabesque is the technique of using natural or geometric patterns in a repeating manner to create a wide facade, a wide tapestry. The use of calligraphy, the adoption of some Indian modes of ornamentation such as non-idolatrous Indian sculpture. Non-idolatrous Indian sculpture. ठीक है. So we may not find sculptures of humans and animals, but we are going to find sculptures involving various symbols. तो स्वास्तिका मिल जाएगा, फॉर एग्जाम्पल फ्लावर्स मिल जाएंगे, वाइन्स मिल जाएंगे, दैट मीन्स वो जो वाइंडिंग वाइन्स होते हैं, फॉर एग्जाम्पल मनी प्लांट का जैसे होता है, उसका रिप्रेजेंटेशन मिल जाएगा. वी आर गोइंग टू फाइंड चेन्स, बेल्स एटसेट्रा. जालीज मिल जाएंगे. So these kinds of things we are going to find over here, right? So once again, a blend of arabesque and Indian architecture, sorry, Islamic and Indian architecture over here. ठीक है. तो ये हो गया इंडियन आर्किटेक्चर और इस्लामिक आर्किटेक्चर, इसमें डिफरेंस. And with the synthesis of this, Indo-Islamic architecture emerged. Now, talking about architecture, under the Delhi Sultanate, we can divide it into 3 phases. The first phase during the Ilbari and Khilji dynasties, the first 2 dynasties. Second phase during the Tughlaq dynasty, and third phase under the Lodi monarchs. During the Ilbari and Khilji dynasty, most of the imperial construction works were concentrated in cities such as Lahore, Delhi and Ajmer. Now, इसमें भी the earliest monuments included the Quwwatul Islam Mosque and the अढ़ाई दिन का झोपड़ा. Both of these were mosques that were constructed by destroying existing Hindu and Buddhist structures. The Quwwatul Islam Mosque was built by destroying a Vaishnavite temple, and the Adhai Din Ka Jhopda was constructed by destroying a Buddhist monastery. So main construction material क्या यूज किया गया है यहाँ पर? Rubble from destroyed monuments. ठीक है. Now बेसिक लेआउट ऑफ टेम्पल्स क्या होता था? इस तरह का एक ओपन कोर्टयार्ड होगा, अराउंड विच सम रूम्स में बी फाउंड, एक नैरो एंट्री गेटवे होगा, एंड इन द मिडिल अ टेम्पल इज गोइंग टू बी फाउंड, है ना? तो यहां पे आपको रेडीमेड मॉस्क दिख रहा है? कहीं नहीं दिख रहा है. केवल इसको हटाना है, बाकी सब तो तैयार है, राइट? And that is exactly what was done. The main shrine at the middle was simply broken and removed. The rubble from this was used to construct a wall against the western front of the courtyard, right? क्योंकि Mecca was towards the west and Muslims would turn towards Mecca in order to pray. तो इस वाले रीजन को ओपन रखेंगे. इट वुड सर्व एज द ओपन कोर्टयार्ड ऑफ द मॉस्क वेयर पीपल आर गोइंग टू कॉन्ग्रीगेट ऑन द डे ऑफ फ्राइडे एंड ऑफर प्रेयर. और इस साइड क्या करेंगे? एक फसाड बना देंगे, एक वॉल बना देंगे विद नो आइडोलेट्रस पीसेस. कोई आइडल्स यहाँ पे नहीं देखने के लिए मिलेंगे. इन इट्स प्लेस simply a wall with a niche is going to be made. तो ये गेटवे जैसा लगेगा लेकिन ये बंद होता है. इसको बोलते हैं मिहराब. ठीक है. What about the non-idolatrous elements of the temples? जहां पे कोई human या animal sculptures नहीं मिल रहे हैं, are they going to be discarded or are they going to be utilized in this building? उनको यूटिलाइज कर सकते हैं, उसमें कोई हर्ज नहीं है, राइट? So they were used to erect a series of pillars around the cloistered edges of the courtyard. तो ये edges जो है courtyard के, इनको अब कवर कर दिया जाएगा. And over here some chambers are going to be made. Then the gateway to the mosque is going to be enlarged. तो यहाँ पे एक arched gateway introduce किया गया later on. ठीक है. So this is what happened both at the Quwwatul Islam Mosque and the Adhai Din Ka Jhopda Mosque. One of the other earliest monuments was the Qutub Minar, constructed out of red and yellow sandstone, and it represents the pinnacle of Turkish architecture in India. तो जो पीक है वो शुरुआत में ही पहुंच गए थे ये लोग, राइट। रेड एंड येलो सैंडस्टोन का बना हुआ है, consisting of 5 stories, but originally there were only 4. Construction was started by Qutbuddin Aibak, finished by Iltutmish, and then repaired by the later sultans on several occasions. The Qutub Minar does not have a smooth surface, rather it has a geometrical and fluted surface. Further, the outer surface of the Qutub Minar has been beautified, especially along the cornices. तो कुतुब मीनार अगर आपने कभी फोटोज देखे हो या फिर गए हो तो इस तरह से दिखता है. That there are 5 stories and each of them is punctuated by a cornice. ये होता है. तो यहाँ पे एक पैनल कार्व किया जाता है in which verses from the Quran are inscribed into the surface. So, calligraphy is the main tool of ornamentation. कुतुबुद्दीन ऐबक ने कंस्ट्रक्शन स्टार्ट किया था, इल्तुतमिश ने खत्म किया. नहीं, the Qutub Minar was named after a Chishti Sufi saint, Qutubuddin Bakhtiyar Kaki. Qutubuddin Aibak was a follower of that saint, तो उनके ऑनर में नेम किया है इसको. Now, later monuments include the tomb of Iltutmish, constructed by Iltutmish himself. ठीक है, तो अपना मकबरा इसने खुद ही बनवा दिया था मरने के पहले. It consists of a square chamber which is open on 3 sides. तो 3 sides पे arched gateways हैं. On the interior, red sandstone is used. On the exterior, granite is used. ये आपको अपने notes में मिल जाएंगे सारी details, right? The fourth side, the western side, contains a mihrab. Iltutmish's tomb represents the first experiment with the dome, with the true dome. However, that experiment failed and the dome collapsed. ठीक principle से नहीं बना था, it was not set properly. The dome has now collapsed. ठीक है. Next important monument, Sultangarhi. It is the tomb of Iltutmish's son, Nasiruddin Mahmud. Now, interestingly, Iltutmish had two sons named Nasiruddin Mahmud. ये बड़ा वाला था. He was reportedly the favorite son of Iltutmish and he had died before Iltutmish's reign came to an end. So, for his final resting place, the tomb of Sultangarhi was constructed. क्या देखने के लिए मिलता है? यूनिक फीचर क्या है? The use of the octagonal floor plan on the interior, लेकिन जो exterior है that retains its rectangular footprint. It is rectangular on the exterior. Another important monument, the tomb of Ghiyasuddin Balban, right? Now, in its design, it is very similar to the tomb of Iltutmish, insofar that it has a square floor plan, and on the inside there is use of red sandstone. On the outside there is use of black granite. But unlike the tomb of Iltutmish, यहाँ पे दो changes हैं. While Iltutmish's tomb was open only on 3 sides with arched gateways, it is open on all sides and represents the first successful experiment of the डोम. तो डोम को यहां पहली बार यूज किया गया. ठीक. Some other monuments of this period include the monuments constructed by Alauddin Khilji. The most famous of these is of course the Alai Darwaza. It was constructed as the southern gateway of the Qutub Imperial Monumental Complex. ठीक है. यूनिक क्या है यहां पर? It is the first successful experiment of the true horseshoe arch. There is also perfect blending of Hindu as well as Islamic ornamentation in the form of calligraphy as well as sculpture. Made of red sandstone, it was also the first monument of its scale, of its size, to use marble as a decorative device on a large scale. Okay. Apart from this, some other monuments constructed by Alauddin Khilji include the Siri Fort, the Mahal Hazar Satun, and the Hauz Khas. हौज खास दिल्ली में ही है, तो सब तो दिल्ली में ही इसमें कंस्ट्रक्ट करवाया, राइट. ऑल्सो नोन एज हौजे अलाई. हौज खास का एक दूसरा नाम अलाउद्दीन खिलजी ने बनवाए हैं सारे. अलाई दरवाजा, सिरी फोर्ट, महल हजार सातून, हौज खास. In fact, he even tried to construct a minar like the Qutub Minar, but he wanted to make it twice the height of the Qutub Minar. This is known as the Alai Minar. कहां पे बनवा रहा था? वहीं कुतुब मीनार के जस्ट बगल में, इन दी कुतुब इंपीरियल मॉन्यूमेंटल कॉम्प्लेक्स इटसेल्फ। तो कोई ऐसा मीनार एग्जिस्ट करता है आज? कोई एलाई मीनार जो कुतुब मीनार से डबल हाइट में? नहीं है, राइट? सो दिस वाज अ फेल्ड वेंचर, तो इट वाज ओनली पार्शली कंप्लीटेड। एक स्टोरी भी पूरा कंप्लीट नहीं हो पाया था, बट इट्स डायमीटर इज डेफिनेटली मोर देन ट्वाइस द डायमीटर ऑफ द कुतुब मीनार। ठीक है, दिस पीरियड रिप्रेजेंटेड द पीक of imperial architecture under the sultans. The Sultanate was an expanding power, and the sultans were not afraid to experiment with new concepts and designs. They had the feeling of security. Stability was high enough that they could invest large sums of money in such vanity projects. ठीक है, इसके बाद भी आपको सेम सीन्स देखने के लिए मिलेगा या नहीं मिलेगा? नहीं मिलेगा। क्यों? बिकॉज फ्रॉम द तुगलक पीरियड ऑनवर्ड्स डिक्लाइन सेट इन, एंड आर्किटेक्चर में भी सेम इज गोइंग टू बी रिफ्लेक्टेड। The Tughlaq period characterized by a political and economic crisis. And this feeling or this crisis was also reflected in its architecture. तो तुगलक आर्किटेक्चर की क्या क्वालिटीज होंगे? Is it also going to be as grandiose as the architecture of the earlier period, or is it going to be more tame, more rudimentary, functional ज़्यादा होगा? Functional ज़्यादा होगा. So in place of vanity projects such as the Qutub Minar, great mosques, अब किस तरह का आर्किटेक्चर मिलेगा हमको? Utilitarian architecture. So while mosques and tombs are going to be constructed, the largest monuments in which the state will expend most of its money and attention are going to be forts. So the construction of forts took center stage, with rulers such as Muhammad bin Tughlaq, Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, and Firoz Shah Tughlaq constructing a large number of forts. कुछ नाम बता सकते हो? Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, for example, constructed Tughlaqabad. Muhammad bin Tughlaq, Adilabad. Firoz Shah Tughlaq, Firoz Shah Kotla. Forts at Jaunpur, Hisar Firoza, and Fatehabad, along with जूनागढ़, ठीक है। जौनपुर, हाँ, ये सारे फिरोज शाह कोटला ने ही कंस्ट्रक्ट करवाए। फिरोज शाह तुगलक ने, ठीक है। नाउ mosques and tombs were also constructed, but at a much smaller scale. Did the Tughlaq rulers have a lot of money? बहुत ज्यादा पैसा था या पैसे की कमी पड़ रही थी? कमी पड़ रही थी। The empire was experiencing political and economic crises, and this paucity of funding is also reflected in the quality of construction material and the quality of construction itself. तो हाई क्वालिटी कंस्ट्रक्शन मिलेगा या पुअर कंस्ट्रक्शन मिलेगा? पुअर कंस्ट्रक्शन है। हाईली वैल्यूएबल बिल्डिंग मटेरियल और चीप बिल्डिंग मटेरियल? चीप बिल्डिंग मटेरियल। तो इनएक्सपेंसिव building material such as grey and yellow sandstone along with poor quality of construction were other hallmarks of Tughlaq architecture, ठीक है। So almost all the monuments constructed by the Tughlaqs were made out of grey and yellow sandstone and not red sandstone. Red sandstone was more valuable. It was rarer. It required better labor, more skilled labor. It required more time and effort to perfect, right? On the other hand, grey and yellow sandstone easily available in the surrounding regions. बगल में अरावलीज है, वहां पे बहुत ज्यादा मिल जाता है, so it was easily acquired. Not a lot of skill was used for constructing them. तो surfaces आप देखोगे तो they are very rough and ready. जो इसके पहले वाले surfaces देखोगे आप तो they are almost plain, leveled होते हैं। कुतुब कॉम्प्लेक्स कभी जाकर के देखना, तो वहां पे आपको एक पत्थर भी अपनी जगह से बाहर नहीं दिखेगा। और वहीं तुगलकाबाद, आदिलाबाद चले जाओ तो ऐसा लगता ही नहीं है कि कुछ मॉन्यूमेंट्स बनाए गए हैं। इट सिंपली सीम्स दैट स्टोन्स हैव बीन सिंपली स्टैक्ड वन ऑन टॉप ऑफ द अदर विदाउट एनी फिनिशिंग टचेस, राइट। So inexpensive building material and poor construction quality. Only exception, Firoz Shah Tughlaq. Although the monuments were poorly constructed, made out of cheap material, but Firoz Shah Tughlaq introduced one new material. That was burnt bricks. ठीक है। तो अब ये बताओ बेस्ड ऑन दिस अंडरस्टैंडिंग कि आउट ऑफ द अर्लियर जनरेशन ऑफ इल्बरी एंड खिलजी मॉन्यूमेंट्स एंड द लेटर जनरेशन ऑफ तुगलक मॉन्यूमेंट्स बेटर प्रिजर्व्ड कौन से वाले होंगे? पहले वाले या दूसरे वाले? पहले वाले, क्योंकि बेटर मटेरियल के बने थे, बेटर क्वालिटी से बनाए गए थे। while the Tughlaq monuments are heavily dilapidated. Now, while the Tughlaqs were facing a political and economic crisis, ये इस चीज को दुनिया को बता सकते थे? Could they make it known to the world that the position of the Sultan is extremely weak, or did they need to project strength, to project power? प्रोजेक्ट पावर को प्रोजेक्ट करना जरूरी था, राइट? एंड देयरफॉर द तुगलक मॉन्यूमेंट्स वर आल्सो डिजाइन्ड टू प्रोजेक्ट पावर, प्रोजेक्ट स्ट्रेंथ. फॉर दिस they used the batter technique of construction. अब बताओ, एक किला ये है, ठीक है? एंड द सेकेंड वन इज दिस. देखने में कौन सा ज्यादा ऐसा लगता है कि ज्यादा इंपोजिंग होगा, ज्यादा सॉलिड होगा? इधर वाला. क्यों? इट इज सिंपली अ trick of the eye, trick of the mind. These sloping walls impart a sense of solidity, of strength, of being grounded. ठीक है? And that is the effect that the Tughlaq monuments wanted to achieve. ठीक है? That is why they utilized the batter technique of construction, which employs sloping walls in the construction of monuments to impart a sense of solidity and strength. ठीक है? Now ये ऑलमोस्ट सारे तुगलक मॉन्यूमेंट्स में देखने के लिए मिलेगा, एक्सेप्ट फॉर सम ऑफ द मॉन्यूमेंट्स ऑफ फिरोज शाह तुगलक. ठीक? तो ये हो गया तुगलक पीरियड का आर्किटेक्चर, दी सेकेंड स्टेज. Now we come to the third stage of Lodi monuments. Were the Lodis in a position to undertake architecture at the scale of the earliest sultans? उस पोजीशन में थे कि उस स्केल पे कंस्ट्रक्शन कर पाए? नहीं थे. Why? The empire was shrinking rapidly, and therefore construction activity remained limited. No grand forts or palaces were constructed except for the new city of Agra, which had a small fort. किसने बनवाया था ये? सिकंदर लोदी in the year 1504. The bulk of the monuments consisted of tombs and small mosques. But this does not mean that there was no innovation in the architecture of this period. Some new elements became visible, such as the placement of tombs in which locations? Inside forts or within gardens? Within gardens. तो लोधी gardens में आपको 3 tombs दिख जाती हैं. Within gardens. The utilization of the double dome. ठीक है. तो डोम क्या होता है? सपोज दिस इज द वॉल, तो डोम उसके ऊपर इस तरह का स्ट्रक्चर होगा, अ क्यूपुला लाइक स्ट्रक्चर ऑन टॉप ऑफ द वॉल्स ऑफ द अंडरलाइंग मॉन्यूमेंट. ठीक है. तो ये मान लो कोई मीनार है या फिर कोई मॉस्क है, तो उसके ऊपर एक डोम बनाया जाएगा. नाउ प्रॉब्लम विद कंस्ट्रक्टिंग लार्ज डोम्स क्या होता है? इट बिकम्स टू हेवी, राइट? एंड जितना हेवी डोम होगा द ससेप्टेबिलिटी टू कोलैप्स विल बी दैट हायर, राइट? सो अ वेरी सॉलिड डोम इज नेवर गोइंग टू बी पॉसिबल. So in place of a solid dome, a double dome was introduced. अंदर वाला सरफेस ऐसा लगेगा और बाहर वाला सरफेस ऐसा लगेगा. So this resulted in the construction of a bulbous dome which was more proportionate, and this was used later to perfection by the Mughals. Beginning from the Humayun's tomb onwards, double dome was employed expertly by the Mughals. Thirdly, the use of the octagonal floor plan both on the interior as well as the exterior. Fourthly, the beginning of the use of colored tiles for the beautification of monuments. And finally, the construction of terraced structures. So, for example, Lodi monuments are not going to simply have a single level. They are going to have at least 2 levels. तो बाहर से दिखने में इस तरह के दिखेंगे. Right? These are a series of smaller domes on the first terrace. इसके ऊपर दूसरा terrace, उसके ऊपर larger dome. And finally, construction not at the ground level but on a raised plinth. यहाँ पर एक raised plinth बनाया जाता था, and on top of that the monument, the tomb actually used to be constructed. Important examples include the tomb of Sikandar Shah, tomb of Muhammad Shah, and the Mot Ki Masjid, etc. ठीक. Now take down a question. Trace the evolution of imperial architecture under the Sultans of Delhi. Full stop. Highlight the blending of Indian and Islamic principles in Sultanate architecture. $200. एड्रेस हो जाएगा ये. Trace the evolution of imperial architecture under the sultans of Delhi. So this is nothing but the 3 stages. हाँ, Ilbari and Khilji, Tughlaq और Lodi architecture, right? हाँ, सारे देने की जरूरत नहीं है. For example, during the initial period, you can take the example of, let us say, Alauddin Khilji, or even Iltutmish, or even Balban, etc. During the Tughlaq period, you can take the example of Firoz Shah Tughlaq. During the Lodi period, you can take the example of Ibrahim Lodi, who constructed the tomb of Sikandar Shah, Sikandar Lodi, right, at Delhi. तो इस तरह से आप एग्जाम्पल्स लेकर के आगे बढ़ सकते हैं. Highlight the blending of Indian and Islamic principles in Sultanate architecture. तो जो टेबल बनाया था ना, यहाँ पे क्या देखने के लिए मिलेगा? इंडो इस्लामिक आर्किटेक्चर borrowed what things from Islamic architecture? कॉन्सेप्ट्स. ठीक है, तो सारे के सारे कॉन्सेप्ट्स इस्लामिक आर्किटेक्चर से बोरो किए हुए हैं. अपार्ट फ्रॉम दैट, द arcuate method of construction, ठीक है, involving the use of arches, domes and minars. Construction material, especially the use of lime mortar, and ornamentation techniques such as the use of calligraphy and arabesque. This has been borrowed from the Islamic variety of architecture. On the other hand, from Indian architecture are borrowed ornamentations such as the various sculptural elements like the swastika, the bell, the lotus, vines, and chains, along with the Indian technique of perforating walls or jali work. Secondly, some Indian devices were also utilized in the new buildings being constructed. For example, the use of the Indian or corbelled arch in places such as the tomb of Iltutmish. Further, the use of jharokhas, khidkis, and chhatris, especially on the open pavilions. And thirdly, the Indian aesthetic sense was also borrowed because of the use of Indian artisans for the construction of Turkish monuments. Okay? So, in this way, these two styles were blended together to achieve the synthesized Indo-Islamic architecture. Right? तो ये हो गया है imperial architecture by the sultans of Delhi. उतना माइक्रोस्कोपिक लेवल पर जाने का पॉसिबिलिटी कम है, ठीक है, कि टू कंपेयर द आर्किटेक्चर ऑफ फिरोज शाह तुगलक विद मोहम्मद बिन तुगलक इस तरह से. तो इट इज गोइंग टू बी मोर इन ब्रॉड स्ट्रोक्स. अंडर दिल्ली सल्तनत इंपीरियल और रीजनल स्टाइल्स को हो सकता है कंपेयर करने का आज. तो हाँ, इंडो इस्लामिक आर्ट के फीचर्स उसका एवोल्यूशन कैसे हुआ, दैट यू मे बी आस्क्ड अबाउट. नाउ वी नीड टू टॉक अबाउट द regional styles of architecture. First of all, who is going to undertake this regional style of Indo-Islamic architecture? लिखो. Patronized by the local Muslim governors of the Delhi Sultanate. In which region? In the core region of the Sultanate or the exterior region, peripheral regions? Peripheral regions. क्योंकि core region में तो the Sultanate itself was undertaking architecture ना. In the peripheral regions of the Sultanate, especially after declaring independence. Especially after declaring independence. ठीक है. So rise of the regional architecture is going to coincide with the decline of the Delhi Sultanate. So after the decline of the Tughlaqs, the construction activities at the center are going to become less pronounced, but this is going to be compensated by the emergence of regional styles of architecture in places such as Bengal, in Gujarat, Malwa, Kashmir, South India, Jaunpur, etc. Write down. With the decline of the Tughlaq dynasty, construction initiatives from the Sultans of Delhi became much less pronounced. However, this was compensated by the emergence of Indo-Islamic architecture in its former periphery. Now, as the Delhi Sultanate declined, a number of new regional powers emerged. Are they going to have a uniform style of architecture या हर जगह का अपना एक unique style of architecture होगा? हर जगह का अपना यूनिक स्टाइल ऑफ आर्किटेक्चर होगा. There are obviously going to be some similarities between all varieties of Indo-Islamic architecture, but each of these varieties is going to be unique in its own right as well. Next, right, while some elements of Indo-Islamic architecture were found uniformly across the regional centers. Each of them were unique in their own right. And what was the reason for this diversity? What were the factors for the diversity of regional Indo-Islamic architecture of the Sultanate period? अरे हर जगह का अपना एक environment होता है, अपना climate होता है. Is architecture not a function of climate? No, climate नहीं determine करता architecture को. करता है. तो जहाँ पे बहुत ज्यादा धूप पड़ती है वहां पे आपको किस तरह के बिल्डिंग्स मिलेंगे? With flat roofs, with large overhanging eaves, cloistered apartments मिलेंगे, right? Pillared and vaulted gateways मिलेंगे. जहाँ बारिश बहुत ज्यादा होती है वहां पे sloping roofs मिलने के ज्यादा chances होते हैं. These kinds of things. Number 1, climatic factors. Is geology going to play any role? Yes. कैसे? कुछ जगह पे एक वैरायटी ऑफ स्टोन्स हैं, कुछ जगह पे दूसरे वैरायटी ऑफ स्टोन्स, कुछ जगह पे स्टोन्स मिलते ही नहीं हैं, राइट? बता रहे हैं. तो either wood can be used or some kind of packed earth or brick can be used. For example, बंगाल में larger number of rocks are not found. कोई बड़ी stone quarries नहीं है, तो वहां पे traditionally construction material was either brick or terracotta. wood भी नहीं यूज कर सकते हैं क्योंकि hard wood होता है. It is not suitable for large scale construction. Third, each of these regions already had a well-established tradition of architecture, right? Their artisans were habituated to constructing monuments in a particular style using a particular set of techniques. So, is this not going to carry forward even when Indo-Islamic architecture is going to be introduced here? या फिर completely नया टेक्निक से बनाने लग जाएंगे? थोड़ा बहुत तो आएगा ही. So, unique regional architectural heritage, that is going to be another factor. ठीक है. Apart from this, the scale of monuments, the quality of monuments being constructed is also going to depend upon, अरे इकोनॉमिक फैक्टर्स के ऊपर डिपेंड करेगा या नहीं करेगा? जो ज्यादा रईस राजा होगा वो बड़े मॉन्यूमेंट्स, बेटर क्वालिटी ऑफ मॉन्यूमेंट्स, लार्जर क्वांटिटी ऑफ मॉन्यूमेंट्स बनवाएगा. Economic factors. And finally, yes, political factors. Unstable realms are going to invest their wealth in the construction of defensive infrastructure such as forts, military garrisons, etc. While stable political realms are going to invest in vanity projects, right? So for example, mosques को या फिर मदरसास को या फिर irrigation canals, इन सब में पैसा लगा सकते हैं वो, right? So these are the factors for the diversity of regional Indo-Islamic architecture during the period of the Delhi Sultanate. Now let us conduct a survey of the various regional architectural styles during this period. तो ये वाला हम कवर कर चुके हैं. All of this is imperial architecture of the Sultanate period. Now we need to come to the regional architecture of the Sultanate period. Yeah, development of regional architecture. This portion we have covered largely. With the decline and disintegration of the Delhi Sultanate, the architectural activities were also decentralized and shifted to the provincial capitals and the regional states which emerged on its ruins. It resulted in the diversification of the Indo-Islamic architecture, giving birth to a number of art styles with the manifestation of new features distinct from those of the traditional Indo-Islamic architecture as had been patronized by the sultans of Delhi in the 13th and 14th and 13th and first half of the 14th centuries. To the arched domes and radiating walls of mosques of the north, there were added cloisters that surrounded the courts. Okay? The galleries of the interior were elaborated with short square pillars, bracket capitals, horizontal archways and roofs of flat slabs in the manner of the Hindu and Jaina temples. Okay? So there are going to be a number of changes. Factors for the variety we have not discussed over here, लेकिन हमने आपको क्लास में लिखवा दिया है. Right. Now, number of regional styles emerged. नाम ऑलरेडी आपके पास हैं. बताओ कहाँ कहाँ? जौनपुर, बंगाल, गुजरात, मालवा, कश्मीर, बीजापुर, गोलकोंडा, गुलबर्गा, साउथ इंडिया वाला, right? These things. First of all, Jaunpur developed a new style of Indo-Islamic architecture which showed a profuse and very refreshing blending of Hindu and Muslim architectural traditions. In 1394, a new dynasty emerged with its capital at Jaunpur. This dynasty was known as the Sharki dynasty. And after Firoz Shah Tughlaq, further construction activities at Jaunpur were undertaken by rulers of this Sharki dynasty only. ठीक है? अच्छा. The Sharki architects made simultaneous use of the arcuate and trabeate principles in their building structures, thus bringing about a very healthy synthesis between the two styles. For example, while in their gateways. They utilized the arch. On the other hand, their roofs were sloping, like the roofs of ट्रेडिशनल हिंदू टेम्पल्स. ठीक है, कर्विलिनियर शिखर, पिलर्ड मंडपा वगैरह होता था ना, वो वाले प्रिंसिपल्स यहाँ पे होंगे. नाउ मॉस्क बनाने के लिए यू रिमेंबर बेसिक डिजाइन ये होता था. यहाँ पे सॉरी there used to be a gateway over here. This gateway was now given a monumental scale. ठीक है, तो ये पूरा का पूरा एरिया जो है that is going to be one massive facade, one massive gateway. और वो गेटवे कुछ इस तरह से दिखेगा. This is roughly what the facade of the Atala Masjid at Jaunpur looks like. ठीक है, अब यहाँ पे आपको क्या दिख रहा है? That gateway बड़ा कर दिया गया है. इसके पीछे however are modest structures, छोटे structures बनाए जाते थे. For example, an open courtyard with a cloister around it, adjacent to it. अब इस cloister में the outer surface of the wall of the roof was sloping, but the inner surface of the ceiling वो vaulted होता था. वो इस तरह से ऊपर जाकर के meet होता था in the middle. However, over here, to support this cloister roof, what was used? Pillars and plinths were used. Pillars and plinths were used. ठीक है. By the way, ये जो नया type of monumental gateway है, this is traditionally found in Persia and Central Asia, Uzbekistan में. It is known as the Propylon gateway. और यहाँ पे आपको क्या चीज नहीं दिख रहा है? जनरली गेटवे पर, मस्जिद के गेटवे पर या फिर साइड्स में क्या दिखता है? मीनार दिखते हैं ना. Over here there is going to be no minar, so there is absence of minar. There is also an absence of domes. तो मीनार्स, डोम्स एक्सेट्रा नहीं यूज किए जाएंगे. ठीक है. Now the buildings of Jaunpur were noted for their beautiful arches and decorated vaults side by side with square pillars. This was also something that was borrowed from the Rabiate Hindu style of architecture with bracket capitals. तो bracket क्या होता है? ये जो दो स्क्वायर पिलर्स हैं, they support plinth, right? And ये जो plinth में इसका intervening portion है, that is known as the bracket. In order to beautify it, it was generally carved with particular motifs. तो ब्रैकेट में कैपिटल्स बनाए जाते थे. Massive sloping walls and cloisters, while its mosques were devoid of minarets of the traditional Islamic style. So there was absence of minars. The earliest mosque at Jaunpur is distinguished by a number of carved pillars which were obviously taken from a temple. However, the Jami Masjid is an attempt at absorbing Middle Eastern and Egyptian influences. The Lal Darwaza Mosque and the lovely Atala Masjid owe much more to the Indian styles, both Hindu and Buddhist. Among the extant monuments of the Sharki dynasty may be mentioned the Jhanjari and the Khalis Mukhlis. So, what are the important takeaways from the Jaunpur style of architecture? That it was a blend of Indian, traditional Islamic, Persian and Egyptian architecture. Characterized by the use of monumental propylon gateways, the absence of traditional Islamic devices such as minars and domes, while an open courtyard is definitely present. It is surrounded by a cloistered hallway. This cloistered hallway has a vaulted ceiling with a sloping roof and is supported by short square pillars punctuated by bracket capitals. और इतना लिख दिया, उसके बाद एक दो एग्जाम्पल्स देने हैं. दे सकते हो मॉन्यूमेंट्स के. फॉर एग्जाम्पल द जामी मस्जिद, द लाल दरवाजा मॉस्क, द अटाला मस्जिद, द झंझारी एंड खालिस मुखलिस. ओके, क्लियर. ये हो गया जौनपुर स्टाइल ऑफ रीजनल इंडो इस्लामिक आर्किटेक्चर. कब इमर्ज हुआ? 15th सेंचुरी में, यानी कि 1400s में, आफ्टर द एस्टैब्लिशमेंट ऑफ द शर्की डायनेस्टी. इट फ्लरिश्ड ड्यूरिंग दिस पीरियड एंड शर्की डायनेस्टी itself lasted less than 100 years, so it remained confined to the 15th century only. Next, Gujarat, right? Once again, in Gujarat, the synthesis of Hindu and Muslim traditions was almost perfect. The Turkish governors and later on the sovereign Muslim rulers of Gujarat thoroughly exploited the local architectural talent. So they involved the local architectural talent on a large scale, thus giving birth to the most remarkable and finest among the provincial sites of Indo-Islamic architecture. Among the important monuments, mention can be made of the magnificent Jama Masjid of Ahmedabad, which has 15 domes, each supported by 8 columns, and a hall of 260 lofty pillars and wide cloisters on all the 4 sides of the open courtyard, making it one of the noblest edifices in the whole world. With this mosque, Percy Brown says, the medieval architecture reached the high watermark of mosque design in Western India, if not the entire country. Other important monuments include a small but elegant tomb of Rani Sipri with an attached lovely little mosque, which has been adjudged by far as the most beautiful monument of Ahmedabad. Another production of rare architectural dignity at Ahmedabad is the Teen Darwaza, crowned by a well-balanced, richly decorated arch. It constituted a stately entrance to the royal building complex. Now, notable things about the Gujarat style of architecture. First of all, it represented the perfect blend of Islamic architectural concepts and the Indian aesthetic sense. A large number of Indian craftsmen were involved in the construction of Islamic structures such as mosques and tombs. And while the basic concepts of the architecture remain Islamic, the way in which they are executed are distinctly Indian, especially in the decorative devices. The traditional architecture of Gujarat region is known for its heavy ornamentation in the form of carving of both exterior and interior walls. Secondly, the use of jali has been profusely incorporated into the monuments of this period. Thirdly, the use of pillared halls is another hallmark of Gujarat architecture. Fourthly, the utilization of multiple domes has been borrowed from the Gujarat Jain architecture, which utilizes the series of chhatris in sequence with each other in order to create monumental effect. Okay? So these are the important features of Gujarat architecture. Important monuments include the Jami Masjid with an open courtyard in the center, a series of 15 domes, a large hall with 260 pillars, and a pillared cloistered hallway on all four sides of the mosque. The tomb of Rani Sipri with an adjoining mosque and the famous Teen Darwaza. Yes. So it is not very big in size, but no other monument of the contemporary period can match it in its attention to detail. ठीक है, ये हो गया गुजरात का आर्किटेक्चर. कहां पर? एस्थेटिक. दोबारा लिखता हूं. एस्थेटिक सेंस. Next, Bengal. Now, Bengal already had a strong local tradition of art and architecture in ancient times, and therefore, when Muslim rulers of the province, whether independent or subordinate to the sultans, became responsible for the emergence of a remarkably original Bengali style of Indo-Islamic architecture. ठीक है? It retained many popular Hindu traditions in the structural as well as decorative fields. Even in the construction of purely Islamic art forms like masjids and tombs, Muslim architects adopted Hindu temple style of curvilinear cornices, dwarf square pillars, and the carved designs like lotus for decoration. The paucity of stone necessitated the use of killed burnt bricks and the chief building material as ever before, although the use of stone where available was also not neglected by them. Okay? The tomb and a mosque of Zafar Khan Ghazi at Tribeni, which constituted the earliest architectural monument of the Indo-Islamic style in Bengal, was constructed almost exclusively from the material of Hindu buildings. The Ikhlaqi tomb of Jalaluddin Muhammad Shah at Pandua, not Panda, Pandua, at Pandua exhibits the true character of the Bengali style of Indo-Islamic architecture. The Dakhil Darwaza at Gaur is an imposing gateway which has been built of bricks with terracotta surface decoration. Among other monuments of the later Ilyas Shahi and subsequent rulers of Bengal may be mentioned the Tantipara, the Chamkan Darasbari, Lotan, Bada Sona, Chota Sona, the Qadam Rasool Mosque at God, and the Bagh Masjid in modern Bangladesh. So, once again, what do we get to see in the architecture of Bengal? The use of Hindu architectural elements by Muslim architects in both structural and decorative features. In both structural and decorative features. Why was this? Because this region already had a rich tradition of Hindu architecture, and it was natural for the Hindu sensibilities to bleed in, to merge into the Islamic architecture of this period. Secondly, due to the paucity of stone, what emerged as the primary building material? Burnt brick. Was used profusely for construction activities. However, wherever available, stone was also used. However, stone monuments are much fewer in number. Further, the outer ornamentation of these burnt brick structures were usually done using terracotta. The architecture of this region, the Indo-Islamic architecture of this region, is characterized by the use of curvilinear cornices, short square pillars, and narrow gateways. Narrow gateways. The roof is ornamented. The roof is characterized by the use of both domes as well as the traditional Bangla style roof, sloping roof. In size and effect, monuments कैसे हैं? छोटे और delicate या big and imposing solid? नहीं, they are big and imposing, characterized by the use of thick walls and small openings. Why? क्योंकि जो इंडिपेंडेंट रीजनल रूलर्स थे इस रीजन के, what was the biggest threat to them? Invasion from Delhi. ठीक है, so that is why this kind of effect was given to the monuments. Some important monuments include the tomb and mosque of Zafar Khan, the Dakhil Darwaza, the Ikhlaqi tomb, etc. ठीक है, ये हो गया बंगाल स्टाइल ऑफ रीजनल इंडो इस्लामिक आर्किटेक्चर. नेक्स्ट, Malwa style. Now the Muslim rulers of Malwa have also left behind quite a few monuments of Indo-Islamic architecture with a local strain. अब यहाँ पर हमें एक ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन देखने के लिए मिलेगा. Initially, the majority of buildings constructed were religious in nature. Later on, secular buildings were constructed. Of these, the Jami Masjid of Mandu, completed in 1454, is a beautiful edifice which has been built on a raised platform with a series of arched chambers on the sides and 3 massive domes standing on 12 pillars each, thus leaving very little open space for the congregation. Okay. Secondly, the tomb of Husang Shah, situated at the back of the mosque, is characterized by the extensive use of white marble, wide expanse of its dome, and an additional terrace with 4 corner cupolas between the dome and the lower square chamber. The Hindola Mahal, which is T-shaped plan, was constructed by Husang Shah. ठीक है, तो बता क्या रहा है यहां पर? That number 1, once again, Malwa architecture represented a blending of Indian and Islamic art. ठीक है. Secondly, it is characterized by the introduction of some new elements such as a raised platform, the heavy use of pillars to support large domes, thus leaving very little space for congregation of devotees even within mosques, right? And instead of using pillars to support the cloistered hallways, over here arched cloistered hallways were used. The large scale use of marble was also witnessed, white marble. At Malwa, for the first time in regional architecture, terraced buildings were constructed. ठीक है, तो जैसे हमने लोधी आर्किटेक्चर में देखा था ना कि एक रेज्ड प्लिंथ के ऊपर फर्स्ट वन tomb or shrine is going to be constructed, punctuated by a second terrace over which the main dome is going to be placed. और यहाँ पर अलग अलग छोटे सीरीज ऑफ डोम्स लगाए जाएंगे. ऐसा ही टूम्ब ऑफ हुसांगशा में भी है. तो इंस्टेड ऑफ अ सीरीज ऑफ स्मॉल डोम्स अक्रॉस द एंटायर veranda of the lower terrace, 4 cupolas or 4 chhatris were placed on the 4 corners of the square lower terrace. ठीक है, square lower veranda. That is what is shown. Hindola Mahal, which is T-shaped in plan, was constructed by Husangsha as well. तो ये हो गया in the first phase. Mainly religious monuments such as mosques and tombs were constructed. ठीक है, in its final stage of development या फिर जो second stage है, the Malwa style of Indo-Islamic architecture was characterized by the immense love for pleasure and luxurious life. So over here, secular buildings are going to be constructed for maximizing pleasure and luxury, such as palaces, pavilions, and water forts. ठीक है, the first example of this style is furnished by the Jahaz Mahal, which stands between two small lakes, a double-storied building with a facade of well-proportioned, tall and pointed arches. ठीक है, तो दो लेक्स के बीच में बना हुआ है. It appears as if it is a ship on water, right? That is why known as the Jahaz Mahal. Double storied building है, raised platform के ऊपर बना हुआ है, well proportioned arches का यूज किया जाता है. Among other such monuments may be mentioned the palaces of Baz Bahadur and Rani Roopmati. So they are known as the Baz Bahadur Pavilion and Roopmati Pavilion in the vicinity of Mandu, and the water palace of Kalyade near Ujjain. Chanderi has also preserved a few monuments of Malwa style, including the Jami Masjid, Shehzadi Ka Roza, the Madarsa tomb, and the 7-storied Kushak Mahal. The last monument of the period under review at Chanderi is the lofty Badal Mahal, a double-story archway. ठीक है, तो things to remember about the Malwa style of architecture. क्या होता है यहाँ पर बताओ. दो फेजेस में हम डिवाइड कर सकते हैं. फर्स्ट फेज कैरेक्टराइज्ड बाय मोस्टली religious structures, second phase characterized by secular structures mainly meant for maximizing luxury and pleasure. क्या कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स हैं इस पीरियड की बिल्डिंग्स के? नहीं, मतलब मालवा आर्किटेक्चर के कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स, जो कॉमन कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स हैं. ब्लेंडिंग ऑफ इंडियन एंड इस्लामिक आर्ट. कैसे? Construction of the building on top of a raised platform, the use of a series of domes supported by pillars, closed space, no open spaces, the use of cloistered hallways but supported by arches instead of pillars, right? Terraced buildings, terraced structures बनाए गए, use of marble was profusely done, right? Well proportioned arches were used, multi-storied structures were constructed. Right? So these are the new elements. Next, Kashmir. Now Kashmir also witnessed the blending of the two styles. They continued to use the old stone and wooden architecture, but Muslim geometrical designs were also incorporated. So in Kashmir, the earlier, the old wooden and stone construction were continued, but sculpture underwent a change from idolatry towards geometric designs. ठीक है, तो ये मेजर चेंज हुआ. Obviously new concepts were introduced such as mosques, tombs, etc. And finally, in the regional Indo-Islamic style of South India. Now, in southern India, the architecture was again a synthesis of Islamic, Persian, Egyptian and Hindu styles. ठीक है? So, why Persian and Egyptian styles? क्यों? Rulers वहीं से आए थे and they also invited a large number of scholars and architects from these regions. Right? So, there was heavy foreign influence due to the influx of foreigners on a large scale. Now, the earliest mosque in South India under the Bahmanis was the mosque at Gulbarga, which was erected in 1367, and it is the only mosque in India which is wholly covered over. ठीक है? So एक नया element दिखता है South India में, that there was no open courtyard. And why do you think this was? Open courtyard में क्यों नहीं congregate करना चाहेंगे लोग? Because of the extreme heat and the harsh sun. ठीक है? तो shade was important. But अगर आप पूरे के पूरे courtyard के ऊपर cover कर दे रहे हो, roof डाल दे रहे हो, तो how to get air and light inside? तो sides में आपको openings बनानी पड़ेंगी. कैसे बनाओगे? Light being admitted through side walls which were pierced with great arches. ठीक है? So along the entire side of the mosque there are going to be a series of great arches, and in the middle is going to be a domed courtyard, not an open courtyard. ये कहाँ देखने के लिए मिला है? At the mosque at Gulbarga. Notable among the constructions is in Bijapur is the Jami Masjid, created out of the remains of Hindu structures but never completed. On the walls of the tomb of Adil Shah, the entire Quran was engraved, and the skill of South Indian craftsmen was ably used in construction and ornamentation. Other monuments of other important buildings are Chand Minar at Daulatabad and the College of Mahmud Gawan at Bidar. The College of Mahmud Gawan or Madrasa of Mahmud Gawan at Bidar is inspired from the Persian रेगिस्तान स्टाइल। ठीक है। व्हाट आर इट्स कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स? जो जनरल आउटले रहेगा वो वैसा ही कैरावान सराय टाइप का रहेगा, बट इट इज नॉट गोइंग टू बी क्लोज्ड, इट इज गोइंग टू बी ओपन फ्रॉम वन साइड, leaving behind an open square. Write down. Persian Registan style characterized by an open public square. ठीक है। Each of the facades of these three sides is going to consist of large gateways with grand arches. Use of grand arches along the inner facade. ठीक है। Now ट्रेडिशनली यहां पे जो क्लॉइस्टर्ड हॉलवे होता था वो कैसा स्ट्रक्चर होता था? सिंगल स्टोरीड और मल्टी स्टोरीड? जनरली ट्रेडिशनली सिंगल स्टोरीड स्ट्रक्चर होता था या फिर ये मल्टी स्टोरीड स्ट्रक्चर होता था? इट यूज्ड टू बी अ सिंगल स्टोरीड स्ट्रक्चर, राइट? बट रेगिस्तान स्टाइल में इट बिकेम अ मल्टी स्टोरीड स्ट्रक्चर with as many as 3 stories. Multi-storied cloistered hallways were used. Further, the use of blue enameled tiles was done for decoration. And finally, the entire cloister roof was surmounted by a series of cupolas. A series of small chhatris giving the appearance of small domes. The cloister roof surmounted by a series of cupolas. ठीक है। तो इस तरह का एक मदरसा बनवाया महमूद गवान ने एट बीदर. Thus, the art and architecture of the period cannot be classified into rigid divisions, for while its fundamentals may be traced to a particular school, that is the Islamic style, they are equally influenced by the topography, political and socio-economic conditions of the region. This especially holds good in India, where its vast area, diversity of climate and frequent invasions resulted in the growth of numerous styles of art and architecture. ठीक है। तो ये हो गए the regional architecture. Take down a question. Account for the rich diversity of regional Indo-Islamic architecture in India during the Sultanate period. 200 words. Account for the rich diversity of regional Indo-Islamic architecture in India during the Sultanate period. जौनपुर से साउथ इंडिया, वो तो आपको सर्वे तो करना ही है, बट यू विल ऑल्सो नीड टू गिव द रीजंस फॉर दिस रीजनल डाइवर्सिटी. तो कुछ फैक्टर्स हमने वहां पे डिस्कस किए थे. सम अदर फैक्टर्स सच एज डाइवर्सिटी ऑफ क्लाइमेट, डाइवर्सिटी ऑफ सोशियो इकोनॉमिक कंडीशंस, डाइवर्सिटी, हाँ, जियोग्राफिकल कंडीशंस, द large scale invasions, frequent invasions, the influx of foreigners, the mingling, the inheritance of regional traditions of architecture, all of this is going to create a unique result in each of the regions. So that is what we can talk about. ठीक है, तो ये इसमें करना होगा. So that is it for today. I'm ending this lecture. आज हमने आर्किटेक्चर कवर किया है सल्तनत पीरियड का. इन टुमारोज क्लास, कल क्लास है अपना? नहीं, कल आपका वर्ल्ड हिस्ट्री का क्लास होगा. तो इन आवर नेक्स्ट क्लास विल बिगिन विद विजयनगर एंड बहमनी. ठीक है, या कल हमारा क्लास है? हमारा क्लास है कल? नहीं, सैटरडे को वर्ल्ड हिस्ट्री क्लास होगा. हाँ हाँ हाँ, प्रॉब्ली, या यू आर राइट, यू आर राइट, वर्ल्ड हिस्ट्री का क्लास होगा. यू आर करेक्ट. ठीक है, ठीक है, चलिए देन. If there are no doubts, shall I end this session? Thank you.